My name is Keith Logan. I am the principal of Logan and Associates. We do biomass innovation consulting and rural development. I'm also here on behalf of Dan Holler, the city manager of Grass Valley. And I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to comment. I also would think that the work on the papers was very good, very concise under constraints. I'm here to address two technologies and suggest that they need some additional review, that they are no longer emergent, but are actually in the process of being deployed. And I know it's very difficult to catch these technologies as they move forward, but this is actually happening in real time. My concern is that these technologies should be included in AB 341 75% goal. The term transformation in the Public Resource Code 4021 currently does not include pyrolysis. One of these technologies developed by the former Vice President of Ford has steam reforming pyrolysis. Another is that from page 5 of the overview, thermal technologies are not included, and the second technology is a thermal microwave depolymerization. So there's lots of aspects we all know what we're looking for, but these technologies are both involved in biomass or municipal solid waste into drop-in fuel, into specifically synthetic diesel, which is not biodiesel. This is synthetic, similar to what you'd buy in Napa on the shelf. No oxygen, low sulfur, very high cetane, etc. Both of these processes have, according to a life cycle analysis, greater than an 80% reduction in the GHGs from their fossil fuel alternative. We're looking at the long term of the avoided GHGs, which you mentioned specifically in your presentations. So to get right to the point, they're here now. I've just spent the past week actually developing contracts here in Northern California for one of these technologies, and the other has been tasked by the DOE specifically to find a site and the supply chain here in Northern California. So we have first in the Municipal Solid Waste Technologies paper, you address combustion. I agree with the findings. In section 5B, long-term challenges, gasification and related technologies may offer advantages in these areas, but the technologies are not yet mature. Well, they weren't 6 months ago, but at this point they are actually here now. Company A has completed testing of a 25-ton per day commercial demonstration plant that was funded by a $25 million DOE grant on time and on budget. They're completing their last three months of testing. It's gone through 640 hours. The exciting thing is it works. That particular technology can be used for municipal solid waste. They're focusing on biomass. It will create 54 gallons of synthetic diesel per ton. According to Argonne Labs' GREET model of GHGs, an 89% reduction in life cycle GHGs. The other technology is a continuous microwave thermocatalytic depolymerization. They have a 5-ton per day demonstration plant. The third-party review of the technology by AECOM states that, in conclusion, AECOM believes the process will revolutionize the manufacture of biofuels from cellulose at a cost equal or lower than current technologies, et cetera, et cetera. That is a fully closed loop system. It's a microwave technology. There are the GHGs in the process, and again, about 80% lower. Fascinating about that technology is that about 80% of the MSW is remanufactured. It would not hit a landfill. So you guys have done an excellent job. This is new information, and I think it would probably be worth reconsidering, because the cost of not considering those and not allowing those technologies to participate in that 75% could be significant, and that will, that's really all I have to say, but I hope you revisit that. Thank you very much.
And Keith, as with anybody else who has a technology, we'd be happy to have a separate conversation to learn more about that. So, who did I promise next? Jack, I think.
Yes, thank you, Howard. Jack Macy, City and County of San Francisco, Department of the Environment. San Francisco, as you may know, has a zero waste goal. With the highest and best use principle, and that ties very much into reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We have a very ambitious greenhouse reduction goal. We've achieved, using the state calculator, 80% diversion, and we have policies such as mandatory construction demolition debris recovery, mandatory recycling and composting participation, and those have made the biggest difference policy-wise. And the way we look at it is that, with our programs, we can collect for recycling and composting and process and market in a reasonably feasible way about 90% of the discard stream. Given we have a very robust commercial sector, and that means, so our mandatory participation helps us move towards that 90%, and then EPR policies can help increase that 90% or shrink the 10% that is not recoverable. And so the higher and beneficial use of reuse and recycling, remanufacturing, composting, and AD can handle 90% potentially. And we think that it's really important to focus on that. There are a lot of actions, I think a lot of good actions, but there's so many in such a short amount of time. It's really important to prioritize, and I wanted to echo comments, particularly that Rachel Oster and Julia Levin said along those lines. And so, things that focusing on the big items, food scraps, going at paper, wood, and and things, the emission benefits, including the avoided landfill emissions and emission benefits. That we're talking about compost benefits. They're understated because, as we've heard, there are a lot of benefits of reducing fossil-intensive fertilizer, pesticide, irrigation use, and even on the sequestration side, there's research showing it's much more beneficial, on the order of several tons an acre net benefit. So we really encourage that. We ought like to see credits for fuel production. There was talk about fuel production, not just electricity. We have enough. We can digest our food scraps and run an entire collection fleet on renewable natural gas, and that's what we want to do. We want to add to our composting programs and do anaerobic digestion first. We want to do that in San Francisco. A big challenge is having enough incentives countering what is happening with landfilling. And so I want to the bottom line here is more incentives, both in terms of financial as well as policies that can drive materials. The papers show a good excess capacity. Let's fill that up with helping both on the collection end and at the end use market end, and then expand that infrastructure. So we really need to incentivize, support, and develop collection and processing and market infrastructure for those strategies. Again, reuse, recycling, composting, anaerobic digestion, or as Julia said, anaerobic digestion and then composting. And those clearly have a greater greenhouse gas benefit that we've seen, and there's various studies that are not referred to here, over landfilling or conversion or thermal technologies. And so we're concerned by a lot of analysis that goes into how to improve landfilling, that can end up creating more incentives to landfill or to essentially burn materials. And so policies, as I said, that our mandatory is very effective. So we'd love to see a statewide mandatory participation, not just in the commercial sector, as was proposed in AB 323, that unfortunately hasn't gone anywhere, but also in the residential sector. And I guess, again, strong incentives. Landfill ban of organics, of food scraps, that would be great. And there are actually other states that are starting to do that. Are we going to let Massachusetts top California, because they're about to, next year banning commercial food at the landfill? So, and the other examples are, we don't believe that there should be RECs for thermal technologies. How is burning non-renewable or non-sustainably harvested materials renewable or green energy? And again, we feel like that's distorting the priorities that we need to pursue that we know will reduce greenhouse gas benefits, greenhouse gas emissions greater. So that's my bottom line. Again, thank you for the workshop and all the work that's being done, and for this opportunity.
Gary List and Associates. I concur with.
Hang on one sec, Gary. Okay, my cue, folks. I see you all. We got Gary, Bill McGavern, Bill Worrell, and then I go to the emails. Heidi's after the emails.
Okay, Gary Liss and Associates. Concur with Jack's suggestions on, first of all, great job on the papers, except for the thermal. The thermal misses the mark. I agree with Jack on that. We don't want to prioritize investing in landfills and thermal because it's only going to be 10% or less of the total stream. We should be focusing on reduce, reuse, recycle, compost, digest, and redesign. That's where the money should go. That's where the incentives should go. It should not go into mixed solid waste thermal. It's only going to be for a small percentage, and we're going to get that out with EPR and product stewardship. On facility permitting and incentives, that seemed to be the major focus of all the papers. That was really important, particularly great recommendations on remanufacturing. R&D, I was glad to see the emphasis on R&D. We don't have an R&D for this entire industry. We need to begin investing in R&D together with the university system. On the life cycle analysis, we need to make sure that we include the upstream analyses. There's been some suggestions that thermal technologies are better. That's if your boundary on the life cycle analysis is just at the solid waste stream and doesn't look upstream. The life cycle analysis needs to look upstream. For R&D targets, I'd like to focus on problem materials, organics, particularly development of local markets, and strategic things where we're most likely to deal with things that we're going to be stopped from exporting to China. China has started the green fence. It's a warning shot over our bow. We may have markets today. Markets will not necessarily continue as they have been. It's not static. We need to be investing significantly in the remanufacturing. On the nitrogen issue, on food versus fuel, there's been discussion both in the composting and biomass sections suggesting we can do both. There's a trade-off between where the nitrogen goes. Either it goes into the fuel or into the land. And that may be a local decision that should be made, but I think it needs to be explicit that there is a trade-off. It is nitrogen going into food or fuel, and the question is, where is it best used and who should make those decisions? Is that a statewide decision, or should that depend on local applications and local uses? On the more larger picture issue, I only saw the reference to net zero a couple of times. I love that you had zero in there at least a couple times. When I searched each document for zero, that's where it came up. No mention of zero waste. Zero waste is what businesses are leading the way to. Thousands of businesses have saved tremendously. You've heard my testimony before in multiple hearings. We need to include zero waste as a goal as part of this and have a stronger linkage with the AB 341 75% plan. The 75% plan is mentioned, but the breadth and scope of it is not even integrated. These documents look at facilities and technologies, not at the outreach, education, and new rules type of issues that were addressed in the 75% plan. So at a minimum, in the appendix, have a summary of the 75% plan, particularly those attributes that are not included in these documents so far. On new rules, it needs a lot more work on that, like Jack just went over. C&D is a great example. Construction demolition debris, virtually no public money, no incentives have gone into building C&D recycling facilities in the state of California. The reason is local governments have adopted C&D ordinances and said, you must do this, achieve a 50% diversion, and the industry responded. They could go to the bank with that requirement and get their facilities funded. We don't need the incentives. We don't need to fund these initiatives if we have strong new rules like Jack was suggesting. So the mandate, building on AB 341 to add food scraps to AB 341 would be a great example. And not waiting until we see the results in order to, like Nick suggested, not waiting until the results of our successes come out. Start working on phasing out of landfills. Europe did it in 1999. The landfill directive requires pre-processing. Nothing gets buried unless it's pre-processed. And organics, 35% reduction by 2016. 7 years out from their original goal. We need to replicate that 1999 landfill directive. Our rules regarding landfills are deficient dramatically and are way behind where they need to be. Landfill surcharges, if you don't go for the mandatory rules, then landfill surcharges is the alternative. There's a trade-off between rules versus fees, incentives, and rate structures. So if you go with the rules, you don't need to do all the financial stuff. If you don't go with the rules, you do need to do the financial stuff. One of the easiest financial things, one simple stroke of the pen by the governor signing a bill to add a $10 to $20 a ton landfill surcharge, like the Sierra Club National Zero Waste Committee has called for, could change the economics overnight. Around $50 a ton tipping fee is the point at which most of these technologies will look economic. We don't have that consistently around the state. A $10 to $20 landfill surcharge would accomplish that.
Okay. Gary, I'm going to ask you to add
Wrap
one
up.
or two more comments. You can have the mic later on for more ideas, but I want to get everybody else as well.
Right. On outreach and education, it's totally deficient in looking at the behavioral aspects, the cultural change required. Included in this should be a challenge to businesses and communities to pursue zero waste as part of the climate change initiatives. By just asking them, like the Ministry of the Environment in Japan did, they asked their businesses to respond. 2,800 businesses did. 99% got zero to landfill, 34% zero to energy. Just putting that challenge out there is important, and then promoting recognition and certification programs for that effort. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Gary. Now let me go over to Bill McGavern, then Bill Worrell, emails.
Thanks. Bill McGavern, Coalition for Clean Air. And I was impressed by the presentations. I think that this sector has a very important role to play in this round of the scoping plan, particularly in reducing methane emissions. We think that the scoping plan this time around needs to focus much more on reducing the shorter-lived pollutants. Methane, of course, is a very powerful and short-lived pollutant, and the waste sector, as you recognize, has a lot of opportunities to reduce methane. Two of the clearest and I think most powerful are to keep organics out of landfills and to ratchet down on the existing landfill gas regulation from the early action measures. So those both need to be revisited and really brought to fruition this time. On the other hand, when you talk about burning municipal solid waste or heating it to very high temperatures, we get concerned about the air emissions, and I didn't really hear that addressed. I'd be interested to know what sort of data you're using or planning to use when it comes to evaluating the air emissions from those technologies. And I think we should recognize that burning or cooking our municipal solid waste is not recycling, it's not renewable, it should not be put in those categories and should not be put high or even medium on the hierarchy of what we should be doing with our waste materials. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Other Bill.
Bill Worrell, San Luis Obispo County Integrated Waste Management Authority. A comment and a question. First, a comment. I think all of us in this room would agree that getting organics out of the landfill and waste reduction are the two of the key strategies for reducing greenhouse gas. Yet this session, the California legislature had a chance to eliminate millions of tons of organics through the ADC ban and to eliminate 13 billion single-use plastic bags, yet failed to pass either of those bills. I just ask that you be sensitive as you prepare the scoping plan and the report to the legislature on 341, that you not ask us poor little staff and local government to go talk to our elected officials to raise the cost of garbage service to accomplish goals that can't be done at the statewide level. For the question, and maybe or maybe not, you can answer it now. The overall paper introduction talks about meeting the AB 341 2020 goal would be determined directly from the data obtained from the waste characterization study. Obviously, that's a huge shift from how for the last 20 years we've been counting waste diversion. Do you Can you expand on that a little, or what the philosophy behind that is?
I'll briefly do that, and we'll have to get into a longer discussion. But what was it? 5 years ago now, we shifted our counting system from diversion estimates to per capita disposal estimates, and that's what we've been basing things on ever since. The waste characterization studies, we have a major one that is going out for, might even be in the RFP already, but will be awarded shortly, and there'll be a major study on both disposal at landfills, various generator sectors, and a number of special materials to try and get at many different questions, but including measuring the efficacy of the mandatory commercial recycling regulations and movement towards greenhouse goals, gas reductions in general. So
So it's more than waste characterization. It's also looking at disposal at those sites.
I don't think anybody can hear. That was looking at disposal, Bill. Where?
Yeah, it's more than just a waste characterization study. It's looking at disposal numbers and
Yeah.
sectors. And
Yeah,
okay.
this will be a repeat, but with much more of the 2008 waste characterization study, which was probably the most comprehensive, but this will have even more parameters and issues looked at, up to a point. We don't have unlimited funding.
As someone who did their first waste characterization study in 1978, looking at hundreds of pounds of waste to determine 30-some million tons of disposal is a really tough thing to do.
Agreed. However, well, we won't get into the debates on the commercial recycling regs and whether we needed a manifest reporting system and the like. Let's see. So that, I was going to go ahead and give Heidi, but she left, so I'll apologize to Heidi. So far, okay, Mary, well, I've got 3 emails. Let me just quickly run through those. There's no other emails, so let me just quickly raise those, and we'll go straight back to Mary and then others in the audience.
Let me take that one.
Okay, go ahead.
Tyler Harris, Ventura County APC, have you evaluated the composting rules, South Coast AQMD and San Joaquin Valley AQMD for consistency with the goals of the plan? What changes would you make to support this plan? As we talked about a little bit, I mean, we have looked at the South Coast plan, and we've been in contact with San Joaquin. With respect to the composting rule, we have identified this as an area where ARB needs to provide some resources. We want to sit down and work with the local districts with respect to those rules, see whether we have permitting issues associated with that, and move forward. So that's one of the implementation tasks that we've actually already initially started to work on, and so that's what we're going to be doing with respect to looking at the rules, to looking at permit streamlining, to looking at model rules or programmatic EIRs on that. Kevin Barnes, City of Bakersfield, how much GHG reduction is there in the AB 32 overall versus just the 5 million metric tons in the waste related plans? I do not know. I don't know what's in the overall plan. Is anybody from
Well, didn't the 2008 have something like 170 million metric tons or 150?
I'm getting a shaking of heads of some people saying yeah, somewhere in there, but I mean I know the scoping plan right now believes that we're going to get the 2020 or the discussions with respect to the update believes that we're going to meet the 2020 20% goal on that, but I don't remember the specific values.
And the last question that we have so far from emails comes from Norma McDonald, Organic Waste Systems, Inc. Has there been any consideration of how the use of digestate could be synergistic with other soil and water quality goals? Specifically, is there any quantification of how much digestate it would take to remediate soils, especially those near or around the oil fields? We certainly have discussed the issues related to digestate, which would come out of anaerobic digestion facilities, and they may need to be further composted, and the benefits of those materials in soil and water quality, water retention, and improving soil quality, those are generally qualitative discussions as opposed to quantitative discussions. I don't think we have anything on how much it would take to remediate soils around, say, oil drilling or fracking operations, but that's an interesting question. Certainly remediation is one possibility. We'll keep tracking emails. Let's go to Mary. Do you have the mic, Mary? Okay.
This is Mary Pitto with Rural Counties ESJPA, and actually I'm speaking for Heidi at this moment.
Thank you.
She asked that I apologize for her. Heidi with the California Product Stewardship Council, she had a previous meeting she had to attend. She indicated that they would be submitting comments in writing, but she wanted to commend you on your state procurement section, and especially wanted to note that when you're considering developing a program, that you look to manufacturers that have take-back programs as a priority in the program. And she also wanted to indicate that when you're looking at EPR programs, to focus on the hazardous materials first.
Thanks, Mary. And I'll call Heidi, because if she'd let me know she was leaving early, I would have gotten her in, but I didn't realize that. So thank you for being our proxy.
And I did have one comment to make on behalf of the ESJPA, and that's I did want to understand if on your landfill emission, if you have revised the calculations as to what percentage they are in your greenhouse gas emissions, because in the 2008 plan, scoping plan, it indicates that they represent 1% of the carbon emissions. And it seems to me like there's a lot of focus on ratcheting down the landfill methane control measures for less than 1% of a gain, and that there's a lot of other measures that you've been talking about that it seemed like would be more cost effective.
I think in the latest estimate, it's 1 to 2% of the emissions. Part of the issue associated with that is the disagreement as to how well methane capture occurs in there, and that's part of the discussion about additional emission reduction factors and all that. You know, basically landfill is a reactor, but it's not a closed system reactor, and there's a lot of debate as to how well a properly maintained gas collection system, does its job, what percent efficiency. There's a lot of back and forth on should we be doing detailed analysis to figure out what the exact emissions are from there versus phasing things out of going to landfills. Regardless of what we do, we are going to have a bunch of existing landfills that we still are going to have to deal with. So there's just always been a lot of activity on landfills, and it sounds like it's going to continue for a while.
Okay, we'll now reopen it for new folks still. So go ahead, let's go over here and then to John, and then I see a couple of hands who've spoken, and we'll get you guys after the new entries.
Can you hear me? Yeah, my name is Lane Braldi with Synagro Technologies. And I wasn't going to comment, but the gentleman who brought up the rules with the South Coast and the San Joaquin about composting, they weren't greenhouse rules. They were VOCs, ozone precursors and all that. And these regulations make it very difficult to site these compost facilities that you want. And I know there was a study at UC Davis that speciated the VOCs that were being emitted from compost sites and found that they were not precursors or any, had any effect on the ground level ozone. So in effect, you're treating for VOCs that are somewhat irrelevant to the rule. I know EPA has to adopt these studies before the local air boards can do something, but if the state really wants compost sites to be developed close to where the sources of the green waste and the biosolids and all that are done, the rule should be based on sound science that applies to, the actual emissions. So that would be very helpful. And the one thing that was very encouraging is, in reality, these sites take several years to permit and very discouraging, and you need a lot of investment by municipalities. Someone has to say, hey, I'll send you material before a private sector invests $20, $30 million on a site. So, the permitting streamlining would help a lot to do that, because it takes a lot of time and money to actually build these facilities for the people in California, when, you're getting dragged through 7-8 years of permitting and you don't even have any commitments to tonnage. So it's, it's again, a chicken and egg scenario.
Thank you. Let me just say a couple things in response to that. First of all, the UC Davis research that you mentioned, I'm very happy to point out to Kyle down there. That was done under his shop using CalRecycle funds. To the extent that we have had discretionary contract funds, those are the kinds of things that we have tried to put research into. And indeed, it was we have used that information in discussions with South Coast and San Joaquin and others. The VOC issue is related to state implementation plans. That's a federal requirement. It's not a state requirement, so it's not easy for us to go in and say, well, don't pay attention to that, because we're all concerned with air quality, especially in non-attainment areas. So the point's well taken, but it is extremely difficult. In terms of local siting issues, again, the programmatic EIR, which we've done one small sliver of, may help on some of those local issues. We don't have discretionary funding to do much on that yet, but that's listed in the papers, because that may help with some of the local environmental review processes. We also have managed to just start a contract with the Institute for Local Government, Yvonne Hunter, who many of you know, to look at local siting issues, planning and zoning siting types of issues, and what can we provide to local jurisdictions that may help them in the way of models or sample ordinances, things like that relating to siting of infrastructure. So those aren't total solutions, but they are hopefully steps along the path that you're suggesting. Let's go to John in the back, and then I saw Chuck, and then we'll go to Gary and Frank.
John Cupps, independent consultant. I guess I'd kind of like to echo Mr. White's request for transparency on understanding the 22 million tons as being sort of the target. It strikes me that somewhere embedded in there, there's got to be some type of assumptions about growth, and those, as far as I can recall, and looking at your new facet system, those assumptions about growth have not really been made explicit, and I think it would be helpful to understand what those are. So, just again, would agree with Chuck on some additional transparency on how that was arrived at. I guess the other observation, and setting aside any debate or discussion about the whole issue of disposal related, and obviously there's folks who disagree with that, it strikes me that that 22 million tons is a very ambitious goal, to say the least. In fact, I went back and I looked at the CalRecycle data, if you will, in terms of how much diversion increased on an annual basis from 1990 to 2004. And if you look at those numbers, and this is all from the CalRecycle website, the average annual increase in diversion from 1990 to 2004, and I stopped at 2004 because that's when you changed one of the adjustment factors that made subsequent data non-comparable. The average increase was about 2 million tons per year during that time frame. And one could argue, and I suspect most people would agree, that because of inflated generation numbers and some initial inaccuracies due to the lack of scales at the outset, that 2 million tons per year increase in diversion probably overstates it, and it could be somewhat less than that. I would take sort of a scientific wild-ass guess of about maybe 1.5 million tons per year. Now, if you look at the 22 million tons per year, by 2020, we essentially have 7 years left to achieve that diversion goal. That would mean that diversion would have to increase at an average annual rate of almost 3 million tons per year, which, depending on how you look at the earlier numbers, it's certainly faster. It's a faster rate of diversion growth, if you will, or recycling growth than what we achieved when we were just going after the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. So I guess I'm a little bit skeptical as to how practical that goal is, number one. And then I guess the other question that I would like to put out there really focuses on AB 32 and the GHG reduction goals. In several of the documents, it makes reference to the 80% reduction goal by 2050. And it seems to imply that that is a goal that is contained in AB 32. And I don't seem to recall that that, in fact, was an explicit goal in AB 32. Rather, it was a goal that was a part of the Governor Schwarzenegger's original executive order. And I think that has potentially significant ramifications because, you know, quite frankly, there's a big difference in terms of the force and effect of an executive order and what authority that confers on the ARB to implement regulations versus what a statute does. So I'd like some clarification on that point.
Dan Donahue, ARB, you're correct. The 80% 2050 goal is not part of AB 32, but it was part of the executive order.
With respect to your first question, John, about transparency on the 22 million tons and the practicality of 75%, let me steer you back to the May 2012 paper where there was a whole section on how that was calculated with low, medium, and high range economic projections and the like. That's been tweaked a little since then, but the same basic results are still inherent. I'll just ask you to look at that and see if that explains things enough. In terms of 75%, yeah, it's daunting. We know that a lot more is going to happen. That's why you're hearing discussion today about incentives, mandates, phasing organics out. Those kinds of activities or those kinds of policies would be needed if we're going to be able to move towards that 75% goal. Okay, I think we had Gary and then Frank. Oh, okay, you got the mic, but we got 3 guys in the queue. Let's stick to those 3 and then we'll get others. Okay, we don't want to hear you. I'm controlling the mic.
It's Chuck Helga, thanks a lot. I was going to compliment you on the quality of your reports and stuff, but I'm backing away from that now. No, these reports are very well prepared, and there are a lot of very good ideas in these reports, many of which we can support. Again, Chuck Helga, representing Republic Services. But I think that we do need to apply, as we sort through these proposals, a cost-effectiveness standard. And the scoping plan update, I think, should include some sort of cost-effectiveness analysis of these ideas. We have limited capital available. It's not unlimited. You have limited public resources, public funds available. And as much as we'd like to dedicate billions of dollars to developing the infrastructure, we all know that that's not going to happen. Maybe together, the industry plus some public funding, we can get there, but that's what it's going to take to get, in the next 7 years, 22 million tons of diversion. So let's focus on the measures that can get us the most bang for the buck, the most greenhouse gas reductions for the best expenditure of those resources. We believe that one of the concepts proposed in your reports, the mandatory commercial organics recycling, would be a very strong first step towards doing that if it's properly implemented, and if markets are duly developed. That can be probably one of the most cost-effective concepts that you've included in your report. And we'd hope again that you, as you move through this process, we certainly want to be a resource for you. We will be providing additional written comments, and we certainly will be talking with you over the next couple of months. Thank you.
Thanks, Chuck. We'll go to Gary, Chris up here in the front, and then Frank, and then Evan.
Just a few other items that I didn't get to before. In terms of urgency for priorities, there was a bunch of discussion about need to prioritize. First of all, on the technologies, the top of the hierarchy, not the bottom of the hierarchy. So any resources and incentives should focus on reduce, reuse, recycle, compost, and redesign. In that realm, probably the biggest bang for the buck in getting greenhouse gases out, along the lines of what Chuck just talked about, is the phase out of organics and focusing on composting. We really need to figure this out. It's just unbelievable. We haven't developed more composting infrastructure, particularly for food scraps in California over the last number of years. And this is a huge opportunity to both this and the 75% plan to put a lot more resources into doing that. I believe the phase out of the organics as a policy, and the including food scraps as part of AB 341. Any business that generates a certain amount of food scraps would have to recycle them. The same idea as AB 341 or piggyback onto AB 341 is a tool that could accomplish that. The other major priority in all of the papers that were presented was economics. And again, the economics comes down to either new rules or fees, rates, and incentives. And in my mind, the sweet spot is the new rules if we can build the political will and consensus behind those. So to do that, we need your support in recommending the new rules so that the legislature can at least consider them, and then say to the legislature, if you don't adopt these new rules and you want to get to the goals you've adopted, then you need to add these fees. So give them the menu. You can go from column A, which is your new rules, or you can fund these initiatives or give up on your goal because the economics aren't working. And towards that end, including a zero waste goal will focus not just on the low risers, but give the people on the upper end of the scale more incentive to pursue it. So if you challenge people to go for zero waste, which businesses are already doing, challenge them and encourage them and provide technical assistance to them and recognize them and support recognition and certification programs, that will get you a lot more bang for the buck, because those people who want to go for zero waste will do it voluntarily and provide you an incredible amount of tonnage without you doing hardly anything. So that challenge is a real important priority, having a zero waste goal. And it's not just about tons diverted. Yes, it's about greenhouse gases, but it's also about value and reinvesting these resources in the economy. It's not about waste. It's about resource management. And you need to communicate that in this, what you're doing is providing a vehicle for investing those resources not in China, not exporting them, but in the California economy with multiplier effects. You need to get the economic development people, go biz, to do the multiplier effect calculation to show if you do accomplish reinvestment of X number of tons per year, and by 2020, it will result in X number of direct jobs, indirect jobs, tax revenues to the state, tax revenues to local government. Do that economic calculation. It's not just about tipping fees, it's about wealth reinvested into the community. In terms of the contribution of 1% of solid, 1 to 2% of solid waste to greenhouse gases, EPA has well documented in their 2006 to 2009 systems analysis that it's 37 to 50% of all greenhouse gases in America could be influenced by waste and reuse, recycling, zero waste policies. If you go to westcoastclimateforum.com, EPA Region 9 has developed a great system, pie charts that show that. I'd encourage you to put a pie chart like that into the report to highlight that it's not about 1 to 2%. In terms of Efficiencies of processing. Another key idea in your facilities analysis should be not just the capacity, but how efficient are these different technologies at accomplishing the reduction in the greenhouse gases and doing it, as Chuck just said, on a cost-effective basis. Landfill gas to energy, for example, in that equation will come up as the least efficient way of doing things. And it will underscore why we need to put our investment into composting and digesting. When we're talking about investments, cap and trade, we need to make our priority technologies the ones that come loud and clear through this as what we want to invest our cap and trade in. The last thing I want to talk about is reduce. There's a bunch of discussion about reducing, but there's no paper on reducing. There's no focus on specific actions for reducing. There's no discussion about how do we accomplish reduce. And in fact, zero waste businesses have shown the way. They have reduced. They've eliminated waste. In fact, they save the most money by reducing and eliminating wasteful practices. So we need a separate paper on reduce. Highlight food donations as an example, where the US EPA and the US Department of Food and Agriculture just announced a major campaign to eliminate the 40% of all food in America that is wasted, and to go to the priority of food to people for those who really need it. The reduce will uncover the statistics that I've often cited, the 71 tons upstream from mining, manufacturing, and distribution that are corresponding to every ton of municipal waste locally. I urge you to cite those types of equations. When people hear that there's 71 tons upstream for every ton downstream, it gets them to understand why the upstream is so important. Those are my additional comments. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Gary. Let's go to Frank, and then back to Evan.
Just two quick comments. Frank Capone, LA County Sanitation. Pito had talked about the inventory, the landfill inventory, 1 or 2%. Putting aside any arguments about collection efficiency, it appears to me, and I could be wrong, that as I was going over the data, the actual emissions from landfills from your inventory, that you never accounted for the recession in those numbers. There was a significant downturn in tonnage going to landfills, 20, 30, in some cases 40% reduction in waste going to landfills during the recession. I don't see that reflected in the inventory. So the number that you have in your papers regarding how much landfills are putting out today, I think is wrong. I could be wrong, but that's what I see going through the inventories. You could check that. Webster was here. I don't think he's here now. That's in his shop, so we could work on that.
Yeah, we'll check on that.
Okay. And just a comment. I want to echo what other speakers have said, that energy should be the higher use whenever we can, and to me that trumps composting. We also talk about bang for our buck here. Don't forget, and I don't see it, I think there's maybe a small sentence in here, but I think it should be looked at to a greater extent, that we have a lot of existing infrastructure, wastewater treatment plants that could handle anaerobic digestion. And you really should take a look at that and try to reach out to the other side of the aisle. And I think there's a lot of capacity there and a lot of potential for organics when they come out, no matter what the rate's going to be in the future.
Thanks, Frank. And just on the last point, I want to say that we are working with CDFA and other agencies both to clarify regulatory rules relative to digestion at wastewater treatment plants, and also to recognize that's a potential infrastructure capacity for particularly food scraps, things like that. So I appreciate that. Evan.
Evan Edgar, engineer for the compost and recycling sector. I'm here to talk about biomass conversion. I think as part of the 75% plan, one of the things that was missing was lumber to biomass conversion, and that's really important, so I'm glad to see this paper today. The focus of the technical paper looked at large-scale generation. They gave a couple bullets about distributed green energy. As you know from the Governor Jerry Brown's clean energy plan, he wants to do over 12,000 megawatts as distributed green energy. And as part of SB 1122 last year, small-scale bioenergy, there's a goal of having 110 megawatts from urban waste. As part of that, there's a lot of movement to have less than 1 to 3 megawatt size biomass gasification plants. CalRecycle approved a loan for a biomass plant down in Merced. It's up and running. The next one, the 1 megawatt plant, is running in Oakdale. So biomass gasification, small scale, is working today. One of the long-term goals as part of the technical paper says to develop a community-scale biomass conversion facility by 2035. We're doing that right now as part of the 8 different master plans I'm working on at different compost and MRF facilities. I'm dropping in a 1 megawatt biomass gasification plant that is only biogenic energy. It's carbon neutral, plus it makes a biochar, and I'm working on biochar protocols in order to sequester the carbon into the soil. So there's a great opportunity here that was skipped over by looking at the large facilities, which is important, but to go small scale community is here and now. I echo a lot of comments from Julie 11 from the Bioenergy Association of California with regards to the challenges of interconnection at the PUC. But right in front of us is SB 1122, and they left out urban biomass, urban wood chips from their report. I thought SB 1122 was rather explicit to include urban biomass into that report so that we can have small scale community energy at our facilities, and they skipped over it. We have comments there. I do have written comments today about that. I'm going to hand in to you and pass it out, but that's a great opportunity for the compost and recycling industry to be carbon neutral. We are net zero today with regards to our facility with avoided indirect emissions from recycling. Now we're going biogenic energy for all our facilities, and then we're going to be carbon negative on our fleet. So our industry has come a long way. The recycling and compost sector, formerly known as a waste sector. Thank you.
Thanks, Evan. We'll keep it open. I don't see any hands waving. Everybody's worn out, either talking or listening. I'll just talk for a minute, see if anybody wants to say anything else. You know, we heard a lot today. I think this is really great input, a lot of very constructive criticism and support. You know, we take it to heart. You know, we have a lot of work to do to digest these comments. And the written comments that are to come in the next couple of weeks, and then internally to meet, you know, with across ARB and CalRecycle to determine how we're going to both use this information to revamp any of the papers and feed into the scoping plan itself, as well as how this information, and although some people said there wasn't much of a nexus sometimes, to me this was clearly related to AB 341 and our 75% work. So many of the comments that we heard today, we have heard over the last year. Those need to be considered in the context of that work as well. So I do appreciate everybody who's participated. I guess I'll give it one last shot. Anybody want to have a parting word? Going once, twice, thrice. Done. No, is there anybody? Okay, Gary, go ahead. 30 seconds, Gary. 30 seconds. My notes on your stuff is longer than anybody else's presentation. So.
Just was like to see a similar workshop on the 75% plan soon. January is coming up really fast, and for you to digest comments you get like from forums like this. So to do something like this for 75% plan and really have these two plans dovetail in their total details would be appreciated.
Thanks.
Dan Donahue, one last comment. I mean, two of the things that came up that I'd like some help on in your comments is prioritization. I really would like some additional comments with respect to you all on the prioritization, because you're correct. We don't have none of us have the resources to do all those things. So prioritization is a big deal. And then the other thing is that I could use some help on from some people is on the cost effectiveness analysis. What are some of your ideas with respect to, you know, and that's linked to prioritization too. So if you could kick those around, think about those a little bit, and ship us any ideas with respect to those, I'd very much appreciate those. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time.